Let's look at three different ways to display data: dot plots, histograms, and box plots. All three of these are great ways to see the data rather than just a list of numbers. We start to be able to visualize it and we can see certain things. Let's first look at dot plots. So here are two data sets. And as I said, you can list all the numbers in a data set, but sometimes for us as human beings, it's hard to just look at numbers and see what they might mean. So if we actually graph these two different data sets on a number line with one dot for each data point, we create what's called a dot plot. And here are the two dot plots. This dot plot is for the top data set, and this dot plot is for the bottom data set. And you can see already that there are the data for the first data set are kind of clustered around here, whereas the second data set is kind of clustered around here. So we can automatically, just like by putting one dot for each data point onto a number line like this and creating a dot plot, we can start to see things about the first data set and the second data set. These dot plots are really good for seeing how spread out data are. So you can see that the spread of this data here is for the first data set and over here is for the second data set. You can compare the spread of two data sets. You can compare the rough measure of center of the two data sets. So this first data set is kind of the center of it is right about here, whereas the second data set, the center is right about here. And what a dot plot shows, it shows the minimum value because it shows all values. It also shows the maximum value. It shows the range, which is the bottommost up to the topmost. And it shows all of the different data points. So if you want a kind of a graph that really shows every single data point that you've collected, then dot plot might be the right one. What it doesn't show you the median. You have to calculate that, but you can from all the data points. It doesn't show you the mean. Same thing, you can calculate it. And it doesn't show you the spread in certain ranges, like what we'll look at next, a histogram will do. So a lot of times people will instead use a histogram, but a dot plot is a great way to see all of these things. Let's look at a histogram. So here are two histograms. The way that a histogram works is that you have the number of data points is the y-axis here, or the vertical axis. And then you can see that the data, instead of being called out as individual dots, they're put into ranges. So in this case, the range from 0 to 4, it looks like, and the range in the next up, and then the next up, etc. And you can see that this data set here is really kind of clustered around the middle of these two ranges, whereas this data set has data points in all of the different ranges, so it's much more spread out. So similarly, a histogram can tell you some of the same things as a dot plot. Let's look at what it's really good for. So first of all, it's really good for seeing the spread of the data in the ranges, okay? And a lot of times individual data points, it's hard to really interpret, so putting them in ranges can really help. It can be really great for comparing the spread of two data sets, like this one is much more concentrated and this one is much more spread out. And you can compare the rough measure of center. We know that the center of this data is right around here for that top data set. Here it can't really see like a peak, but it's probably somewhere around here in the middle, so it's probably a little bit higher than the first data set. It also shows the spread in ranges, but it doesn't give you the minimum value. It doesn't give you any exact values of the data set, nor does it give you the maximum. And because you don't know the minimum and maximum, you don't really know the range. It doesn't give you any specific points, and it doesn't give you the median or the mean. And in fact, from just a histogram, you can't really calculate the median or the mean precisely. You can only figure out where the median might be in what range. But it's still very useful to see the center and the spread of data. Now, box plots are really interesting because they give you some of the key information right there in the graph. Let's look at one. So here is a box plot, and we're going to point out different things here. First of all, it's on a number line, very similar to what a dot plot was like. But it points out certain things with the points that are put here, these little dots that are shown in the graph. So let's point out what some of those are. So first it tells you the minimum data point, which is the far left dot that's graphed, and the maximum data point. And then the dot that's in this box here, that's the median. So by just looking at a box plot, you can read the median right off of that. Can't do that with a histogram or a dot plot. And then it also gives you two other values here, and those are called the lower quartile and the upper quartile. So those sound like fancy terms, but really it's just if the median is the middle of all the data, the lower quartile is the middle of the lower half of the data, and the upper quartile is the middle of the upper half of the data. That's all those vocabulary words mean. And why that's really interesting is when you look at the distance from the lower quartile to the upper quartile, that gives you a really good sense of how spread out the data are. So the width of the box here. So that spread is called the interquartile range. Another fancy vocabulary word that just means the distance from the middle of the upper part, which is the upper quartile, to the middle of the lower half of the data, which is the lower quartile. I've abbreviated those as UQ for upper quartile minus LQ for lower quartile. And in this case, if you look at what that value is, if you take the upper quartile value and you minus the lower quartile value, you'll see that that's 15. So that gives you a real good sense of how spread out this box plot is. Let's look at another example here. Here's a different box plot with some different values that you can see show you different things like a different median and a different interquartile range, etc. So box plots are really good for seeing the really important details about center and spread. You get to see the median right away. You get to see the interquartile range, the difference between the bottom of the box and the top of the box right away. And it's good to compare the center and the spread of two data sets. So for instance, this data set right here, you can see immediately its median is lower than this one right here. You can also see that it's much more spread out because the box is wider than the box for this data set. So you can see immediately by just comparing two box plots how the data sets compare. The box plots show the median, the minimum, the maximum, the quartiles, upper and lower, and the interquartile range, all right there to easily read. So it's really great. What they don't show, box plots don't show specific points, and they don't show you the mean. So you won't even be able to calculate the mean without specific points. So box plots are really good for using median and interquartile range.